In March 1919, the people of New Orleans woke up to find a terrifying letter published in their morning newspaper. It was from a serial killer who had been terrorizing the city for over a year. But this wasn't an ordinary killer, and this wasn't an ordinary letter. The letter began, "They have never caught me, and they never will. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell." And then it made a demand that would change the city forever. "I am very fond of jazz music. On next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In your home, there must be a jazz band in full swing. If everyone has a jazz band going, well, then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it on that specific Tuesday night will get the axe." This is the story of the Axeman of New Orleans, the serial killer who held an entire city hostage with an axe and a love of jazz music. The terror began on May 23, 1918. Joseph and Catherine Maggio lived above their grocery store in the working-class neighborhood of New Orleans. They were Italian immigrants who had built a modest life for themselves in America. In the early morning hours, a neighbor heard strange groaning sounds coming from their apartment. When the door was forced open, they found a scene of horror. Both Joseph and Catherine had been attacked while they slept. Their throats had been cut with a straight razor, and their skulls had been crushed with an axe. The axe was found on the back porch, covered in blood. It belonged to the Maggios, taken from their own yard. The killer had used their own tool against them. But the most disturbing detail? There was no sign of forced entry, no robbery, no clear motive. The killer had removed a panel from the back door, reached through and unlocked it from the inside. Then he had walked into their bedroom and killed them while they slept. Police were baffled. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was something else entirely. 2 weeks later, it happened again. Louis Bessumer, a grocer, and his common-law wife, Harriet Lowe, were attacked in their beds. Both survived, though Harriet would die from her injuries months later. The pattern was the same. A panel removed from the door, an axe from the yard, an attack while they slept. Then it happened again, and again, and again. Edward Schneider came home from work to find his pregnant wife unconscious on the floor, her skull fractured by an axe. Somehow, she survived and would later give birth to a healthy baby girl. But she could remember nothing about her attacker. Joseph Romano wasn't so lucky. On August 10, 1918, his nieces woke to the sound of struggle. They rushed to his room to find him staggering, blood pouring from his head. "The Axeman," he managed to say before collapsing. He died 2 days later. By the fall of 1918, New Orleans was gripped by terror. The killer struck at random, always at night, always with an axe. He targeted Italians, specifically grocers. He never stole anything. He simply attacked, and then he vanished into the night. The panic was so intense that hardware stores sold out of axes. People locked them away, terrified their own tools would be used against them. Italian families slept in shifts, keeping watch through the night. Some left the city entirely. And then, in October 1918, the attacks stopped. For months, there was silence. New Orleans began to breathe again. Perhaps the killer had died. Perhaps he had moved on. Perhaps it was finally over. It wasn't. On March 10, 1919, the Axeman struck again. This time, it was the Cortimiglia family, Charles, Rosie, and their 2-year-old daughter, Mary. The panel was removed from the door. The axe was from their yard. Charles and Rosie survived. Little Mary did not. The city was thrown back into chaos. The Axeman was still out there, and he wasn't done. That's when the letter arrived. On March 14, 1919, newspapers across New Orleans published a letter allegedly from the Axeman himself. It was theatrical, bizarre, and deeply disturbing. Written in elaborate language, it seemed to mock the city's terror. "I'm very fond of jazz music," the letter read, "and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned." The letter specified a date, Tuesday, March 19th, 1919. On that night, the Axeman claimed he would pass over New Orleans, but any home-playing jazz music would be spared. "I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit that ever existed, either in fact or realm of fancy," the letter continued. "Undoubtedly, you Orleanians think of me as a most horrible murderer, which I am, but I could be much worse if I wanted to." It ended with a chilling promise. "I shall be merciful and leave New Orleans to myself Tuesday night. But if your people do not jazz it, well then, I shall come back and claim other victims." Was the letter real? Was it actually from the killer? Or was it a hoax from someone seeking attention during a time of fear? The police had no idea, but the people of New Orleans weren't taking any chances. On the night of March 19th, 1919, the entire city of New Orleans threw a jazz party. Dance halls were packed to capacity. Cabarets stayed open all night. Jazz bands played on every street corner. In homes across the city, people gathered around their radios and phonographs, playing jazz music as loudly as they could. Piano teachers who had never played jazz in their lives improvised that night. People who couldn't afford phonographs sang jazz songs in their homes. The sound of jazz music filled every neighborhood, from the French Quarter to the poorest slums. Music stores sold out of jazz records. Dance halls couldn't accommodate all the people who came. Some bars ran out of alcohol. The entire city was united in one collective act of defiance, or perhaps superstition. And on that night, March 19th, 1919, no one was attacked. The Axeman kept his word, but the relief didn't last. The attacks continued. On August 3rd, 1919, a grocer named Steve Boca was attacked in his bed. He survived, barely. On September 3rd, a woman named Sarah Laumann heard someone at her door. When she investigated, she was struck in the head with an axe. She survived. And then, on October 27th, 1919, the Axeman struck for the last time. Mike Pepitone was a grocer. His wife woke in the early morning to the sound of struggle. She rushed to their bedroom door and saw a shadowy figure standing over her husband's bed, axe raised. The figure saw her and fled through a window. Mike Pepitone died from his injuries. He was the last confirmed victim of the Axeman of New Orleans. And then, as suddenly as the attacks had begun, they stopped. The Axeman was never heard from again. The investigation continued for months, but leads went nowhere. The police had no shortage of theories, but no concrete evidence. Who was the Axeman of New Orleans? Some believed he was a gang enforcer, targeting Italian grocers who refused to pay protection money to the Black Hand, a Sicilian extortion racket. This would explain why the victims were almost exclusively Italian, but it didn't explain the lack of theft or the bizarre jazz letter. Others thought he might be a mental patient who had escaped from an asylum. The theatrical nature of the letter, the random nature of the attacks, the sudden stop, all suggested someone who was deeply disturbed, but no escaped patients matched the timeline. There were whispers of something darker. In a city steeped in voodoo and superstition, some believed the Axeman was exactly what his letter claimed: a demon, a spirit, something not quite human. The way he seemed to vanish without a trace, the fact that no one ever saw him clearly, the supernatural claims in his letter, it all fed the legend. Some historians believe the Axeman may have died in the Spanish flu pandemic that was ravaging the country in 1918 and 1919. The timing matches. The attacks stopped in late 1919, just as the pandemic was reaching its peak. Perhaps the Axeman became a victim of the very chaos he helped create. Others point to a curious incident in December 1919. A woman named Esther Albano shot and killed a man named Joseph Mumfre in Los Angeles, claiming he was the man who had killed her husband, Mike Pepitone, the Axeman's last victim. She claimed she saw Mumfre fleeing the scene the night of her husband's murder. Mumfre had a criminal record and had been in and out of prison, and curiously, his prison sentences seemed to align with the periods when the Axeman attacks stopped. When Mumfre was in jail, there were no attacks. When he was released, the attacks resumed. Esther Albano was convicted of murder, but she served only 3 years. Some say the light sentence was because the jury believed she had actually killed the Axeman. But there's no proof. Mumfre never confessed. The evidence was circumstantial, and Esther Albano took her certainty to the grave. Over 100 years later, the Axeman of New Orleans remains one of America's most bizarre unsolved cases. The killer claimed at least 6 lives and attacked more than a dozen people. He terrorized an entire city. He held New Orleans hostage with a love of jazz music and the swing of an axe. And then he vanished, leaving behind only questions and that strange theatrical letter. Was he a man? A demon? A spirit from the hottest hell, as he claimed? Was he Joseph Mumfre? Was he someone who died in the Spanish flu? Was he a mafia enforcer? A madman? Something else entirely? The truth died with him, whoever he was. All that remains is the legend of the Axeman, the serial killer who loved jazz, and one extraordinary night when an entire city played music to save their lives. The victims of the Axeman deserve to be remembered. Joseph and Catherine Maggio, Mary Cortimilia, just 2 years old, Joseph Romano, Mike Pepitone. They were real people whose lives were stolen by someone who thought murder was a game. In the end, the Axeman of New Orleans got exactly what he wanted. He became a legend. His letter is still read today. His crimes are still discussed. He terrified a city and was never caught. But he also gave us something unexpected. A story about a city that came together in the face of terror. A story about the power of music. A story about New Orleans, jazz, and one strange night when an entire city danced to save themselves. This is the crime historian, preserving the stories that time forgot. The Axeman of New Orleans terrorized a city for over a year, demanded they play jazz music, and then vanished without a trace. Who do you think he really was? Do you believe it was Joseph Mumfre? Or did the killer take his identity to the grave? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dive into one of history's strangest unsolved cases, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Next week, we'll be uncovering another mystery from the past that still haunts us today. Until then, remember, the past is never truly buried. I'm the crime historian, and I'll see you in the archives.